Good late afternoon, good early evening, wherever you might be. I'm Cheryl Durst, the Executive Vice President and CEO of IIDA, the International Interior Design Association, and I'm so pleased to welcome each of you to this important conversation, Breaking the Silence in Design. Where do we go from here? I'm going to be joined in conversation by two of my very dear friends who I respect and honor so much, Gabrielle Bullock and Compton. Today's program is generously sponsored by OFS, and thank you, OFS, for your belief and championship of equity and inclusion and diversity. We'll get started with a little bit of housekeeping. For those of you who are interested in obtaining continuing education credit for this program, it is registered for one IDCEC CEU. To receive this credit, you have to attend the entire program. If you don't, we know where to find you. Your credit will be reported within the next week or so if you registered with a member number. If you did not register with an IIDA member number, please contact us at ceu@iida.org. We'll show this slide again at the end of the program with the same information as well as a class code. But with that, how about we get started? And let me introduce you to our panelists. We have Gabrielle Bullock, who is the Principal and Director of Global Diversity with Perkins&Will. Gabrielle is also a past international president of IIDA. Hey, Gabrielle, how are you?
Hey, Cheryl, how are you?
Well, and also joining us is Compton, a longtime friend and colleague of Gabrielle's, and Karen is the founder of A3K Consulting. Hi, Karen.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. How about we get started?
Ready whenever you are.
All right, and again, I'm so glad that we're doing this program as part of our student roundtable series sponsored by OFS. We'll have students joining us in just a bit, and we've got a very diverse audience as well tuning in. So let's get started with a question for you both. In this moment where we're having conversations about equity and inclusion, if this were a lightning round, and I had to ask you, what are the three most important things that we should know about equity, inclusion, and diversity? Who wants to start?
I'll start.
Gabrielle.
So I'm going to add justice in there.
Perfect.
So justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. In order to get to diversity and inclusion, you need to lead with justice and equity. Otherwise, diversity and inclusion are just checking the boxes.
Perfect. That's great. That's great. Karen.
I think what I would want one of the three most important things I would say is that equity and equality are not the same thing. I think we spend a lot of time in society talking about equality without understanding that you can give somebody the exact same thing, but if they never had the same experience, that equality is not going to translate the same way. What we need is equity, which means we need the right solution for the right purpose and the right person and the right circumstance. That to me is probably one of the more important things to know about equity.
Let me even pull us back. I don't want to presuppose or assume, we hear the words a lot, particularly now. And let me ask again, both of you, in the work that you're doing, I think there are a lot of people out there who think they might understand what diversity means or what inclusion means. Can we do a little bit of vocabulary, a little bit of lexicon, a little bit of defining? What does diversity mean? What does inclusion mean? And Karen, you gave a great example of equity and equality are not the same thing. So I just wanted to pull back and maybe look at our other words that we're using.
Could I give you my whimsical definitions first?
I love hers.
I was hoping that you would.
Diversity is asking someone to the party. Inclusion is asking them to dance while they're at the party. And equity is asking them to share their playlist at the party. So it's really about, valuing the diversity to the point where you really can't grow without it. You can't evolve without it. You can't get better without it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
To expand on that,
Karen.
diversity is really having the widest view and perspectives on a situation, an issue, and seeing what I call all the colors on a beach ball. If you think about diversity as itself the beach ball, each one of us represents a different color. We're all part of the ball, but we all just have a different color that we represent. And depending upon how we spin that ball, some people will only see blue and green, some people will only see red. The intent is to spin the ball so that we all see all colors on the ball and that we hear all perspectives, not just one. That's diversity. And we don't have to all agree.
Right. So Karen, being colorblind is not an option, right?
No, because for me, anybody that tells me that they're colorblind, to me, I'm offended, because what you're telling me is you don't see me as a person.
Right.
The whole, and Gabrielle and I talked about this on one of our episodes. We talk about what it is to show up, or to show up at your job, not as your whole authentic self, for a variety of different reasons. But when someone says I'm colorblind, then you have just chosen consciously to ignore the thing that I am every single breathing, waking moment of my life. And so that's not a compliment. That is to ignore me.
Yeah. And then you wonder, so what lens are you looking at me through?
Yeah.
Your own. Differences are not bad. They're actually what makes us much richer and interesting.
So post the murder of George Floyd this summer, and the multiple moments that we've lived through, there are a number of books that are on the bestseller list about being anti-racist. And is it possible to have a truly anti-racist society, which is a different question than to be a truly anti-racist person? Is it possible to have a truly anti-racist society?
My gut tells me no.
Why?
And it tells me that because we've not been anti-racist. Let's talk about the U.S., right? Mm-hmm. We've had every opportunity to fix the wrongs of this country. However, so I think there will always be people who see things a certain way. And what I'm hoping for is that at least we have a society where people are not fighting for simple rights, right? Mm-hmm. Right. So I think we can, if we can understand what it is, right, at least we can each as individuals or groups or whatever say, yeah, I'm not that. I'm not a racist, but I don't know that I'm an anti-racist, because anti-racism means you are proactively going out of your way to tear it down personally, right? Every chance you get. And I don't know that we are there yet as a society.
I don't know that we will ever be able to get there. I think we're going in the right direction, because racism is a condition, and it's a condition that is so deeply pervasive within the United States. I'm going to just focus on the US for right now, but it's such a deeply pervasive condition that even if we moved people to the point where everyone was 100% anti-racist in their behavior, it would take, I can't tell you how many years to begin to dismantle systemic and institutional racism, let alone individual and collective racism, because all racism is not the same. There are 4 different kinds. So I think to really, truly be able to get to being anti-racist, I agree with Gabrielle. I think that's somewhat utopian. I think the best direction that we're going right now is in having really hard conversations and moving us towards being anti-racist as individuals with the hope that we can arrive at a better condition.
And as a society, if we can get our laws, our government, all the barriers really addressed.
Yeah. Karen, you mentioned that racism is a condition. Is it learned? Is it absorbed?
I think it's learned, it's absorbed, it's experienced. As I just said a few moments ago, racism is not a monolithic thing.
Right.
People experience and perpetuate racism on an individual basis, and that's the part that's learned. Then they come together as a community, and that's collective racism, where I share an idea or a stereotype with you, and then you turn around and share it within your own group or organization. So that's the second way. The third way is then it becomes part of a system, whether that's the education system. I'll take that one as probably the most simple point of entry, since we're talking to students. And then it becomes perpetuated in terms of books and curriculum, education, how we acknowledge or don't acknowledge holidays and other people's lived experiences. And then finally, those people graduate and go out into society and develop policies and practices and laws that become part of systemic racism. So I believe it's not just a learned behavior, it's a shared behavior.
Shared behavior, yeah. For both of you, what has your lived experience taught you about the impact of race and culture, or your own impact of race and culture on society? And then I'll even drill down, since we're talking about design and with design students, on the profession of design. Karen, you're a consultant and have done policy work, at the municipal level. At the state level. So I'll ask you that same question with Gabrielle. Maybe we'll address design, and if you can address maybe the work that you've done in public and public policy. So
frame it for me one more time, because I've had so many thoughts about this question.
Your unique lived experience, what has it taught you about the impact of race and culture on society?
That it is deeply painful, not necessarily just for people of color, but for white people and for people who did not recognize that I have been oppressed for as long as you've been living. And so I think what I have learned most, as I really feel like I'm kind of watching the movie at the same time I'm living the movie, is that the impact is so deeply painful and hurtful to people of color, but that it still sits at a very, it does not sit at the same level of depth, breadth, or understanding for those who are not people of color. And that impact, or lack thereof, because of lack of understanding, has not been seen until now. On the public policy side, I don't think I've seen until now a real sense of urgency or a need to get something done. But at times I question the motive silently as to, are you trying to get it done to ease your conscience? Or are you trying to get something done because you really need to get something done? And I don't want to sound cynical. I'm very much a pragmatist, and and I get in the room with a lot of people and develop a lot of policy and direction and advice, but it's interesting to kind of watch what motivates people. But that's what I believe it's taught me at this point.
Okay, all right. Gabrielle, same question for you.
So I think, as a Black woman who always wanted to be an architect, right, to impact how my people lived. So for me, that speaks directly to what the impact of race and culture and what we do with it or don't do with it, right? And so I feel like that it's my obligation to use my profession and my lived experience to inform the work that I do, the work I do with the firm, the work the firm does, that, you know, I have an insight, I have a perspective, and it's not just me, but it's a perspective that has been not dealt with in 100 years.
Yeah.
And so I feel strongly now that it is a real sense of urgency to acknowledge, recognize, and value the different races, the cultures, and all the different perspectives. And it sounds like pie in the sky, but I honestly believe if we don't, as a society and a profession, that we will die on the vine or do harm, more harm.
Yeah, and be rendered irrelevant. Right? What do you both wish that someone had told you or given you as a student to prepare you for the work that you're doing now, to prepare you for the world that you're facing now, right? We all had parents who told us, you've got to be better. You know, you've got to be 20% better than the white people in the room or 20% better than the men in the room. Right? We've all lived with that. But what advice, based on where you are now in life, do you wish someone had given you when you were a student?
So like all of us, you know, my mother said you could do whatever you put your mind to doing. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it. I wish someone had told me that, yes, you are the only one in your classroom that looks like you. You're likely to be in a firm that's the only one that looks like you. Just, you know, deal with it this way, but don't let it make you feel like you don't belong, right? And I never felt like I didn't belong. I just felt like, God, this is so odd. This is so damn odd. So I think just somebody, anybody, if they could have shared with me, you know, look, this is not such a diverse or equitable or inclusive profession, but it can be. So go do this. You know what I mean?
I think if someone had told me, you know, God love my mother. She's a great woman. My mom was a secretary and she did not go to college. So the best she could ever do for me is just, much like Gabrielle just said, you know, you can do anything you put your mind to. What I didn't realize was that it was going to be a lonely road. And I had to figure out on my own how to navigate a lonely road and be successful, not just be 20% better or 30% better or 50% better, but figure all that out on my own with the world's best cheerleader in my mind, yelling in my ear, telling me I could do it. But my heart at sometimes sinking, feeling like I don't know what I'm doing, like I'm figuring it out as I go. And I think what's different for this generation is that there are the Cheryls and the Gabrielles and the Karens and the Tracys and the Mavises that have gone before that will make it a less lonely road for those that come behind. But nonetheless, you will have those moments and you will need to figure out for yourself, within yourself, how you want to navigate those. Because it's not a question of if they're going to happen, it's a question of when. The other thing I would tell my younger self for sure is take chances. None of this is all so serious that you can't go back and fix it. When you can't make a mistake is when you get to be like 60 or 70. Then it's like, oh my goodness, I can't fix that.
Easy on the numbers there. Whoa, hold on, Nelly. Am I done making mistakes?
No, I'm talking about the horrific ones. So when you're young, go ahead and make them. Like, just go ahead and make it. Just realize it's okay. Like, that's what I would love my younger self to understand.
Yeah. It's not the end of the road. It's not the end of the world.
No.
You know, you'll pick up, you'll recover. Your point about the loneliness, and I was an only child, so I feel like I was especially
too.
prepared to be,
Me too.
to understand lonely, but you really don't know it when you've got to draw within that strength within yourself. When you
Yeah.
look around and don't see anyone that looks like you don't hear anyone that shares your perspective, and you've just got to figure it out yourself. You know, you've got the ancestors behind you, and
Yeah.
you're doing it for the folks in front of you, but when there's no one next to you,
It's kind of like,
Yeah. It truly is. It truly is that. And I had to kind of create a whole world of professional friends and colleagues where I could lean on them, many of whom are not in the profession at all. And so they would still look at me like I was crazy. And none of them are business owners. So they still didn't have the same perspectives that I did as somebody who actually runs a business, as a woman of color. I mean, like my story is so genuinely unique in that regard. But the one thing I would say to the students that my mom gave me as a great piece of advice, to your question though, is take any chance in the world, take any opportunity in the world, as long as it satisfies these three criteria. It's not illegal, it's not immoral or unethical, or land you on the front page of your hometown newspaper and embarrass your mother. If you can take those chances and it meets those 4 criteria, go for it.
That's pretty solid. That's pretty solid, Karen. That's fantastic. The role for both of you of mentorship, being a mentor, but your younger selves, and I'm not negating the fact that you might not have mentors now, but what role has mentorship played in your journey? Having a mentor, is there someone who was, we talked that moment about loneliness, but having a network, and Karen, you mentioned it, is so critical and such great advice and insight, I think, for students, for all professionals. But I want to quickly give a nod and talk a little bit about mentorship.
So when I was in school, there was not this network of people.
Yeah.
Right. So I never really had formal mentors or even informal. I had friends who were 4 years ahead of me, so I'd pick their brain. And then in the career, once I started working, still weren't formal. But again, there were a couple of people, senior people in the firm, who took an interest in my advancement and development, right? So I'd pick their brain, but it was always very vulnerable for me. So I never really sought a mentor. So I would say that there's plenty of opportunities now for students to have mentors. That's why I get involved in these kinds of forums, because the students have a much better opportunity to connect with others in the industry through social media and the technology, right? We don't have to live in the same city. And I think that is quite an advantage that all students should take opportunities to take advantage of.
Yeah.
I never had a formal mentor. I think I find myself fortunate in my career that there were several people along the way who saw something in me that they felt was willing to take a risk on and to cultivate. All of them were men. Not one was a person of color. One was David McIntyre, the founder of Enterprise Rent-A-Car, God rest his soul. He was a genuinely nice man, and he taught me how to be a philanthropist. He taught me what it meant. And he really, truly taught me a lot of fundamentals around true leadership. Norm Ross, who used to be the vice president of Parsons Brinkerhoff, was African-American, relocated here from Washington, D.C. And when we first met, he was like, okay, you know nothing about politics. Let me help you learn about politics. And so pieces and parts of my education, my experience, were fostered by individuals who saw something in me but I never actually, much like Gabrielle, I didn't grow up in the era of a formal mentor or formal mentorship. And I truly regret that I didn't have women to play that role, because much of how I approach business, keep in mind, is through the lens of some of those individuals that have brought me along. And I said in the beginning, they were all men. So sometimes my style is not necessarily interpreted, how do you say, well, depending upon who I'm with.
Yeah, I think, the three of us kind of grew up in that era where mentorship wasn't that formal thing. And I think we probably all had role models. And I think mentorship is that next level where you actually have a relationship with someone who is your role model, from whom you can learn something, as opposed to a role model. It's, it might be by observation. Let me ask you both, specific to the students who were assembled, what can students in this moment do right now to impact conversation and work around justice and equity and diversity and inclusion? How can students galvanize their activist within? What can they do now?
It is a perfect time to use your voice, particularly on college campuses of design school and all others. Universities and schools are grappling with this, and they're grappling with it because the students are using their voices. The students are demanding change, and they're being very specific about it. I'm on the board of a university, and it's really the BIPOC students and faculty that have triggered a real focus on change. And so I would advise all students to use your voice. If you see something that you think is not in line with a more equitable and diverse and inclusive environment at school, say something. Your voice matters. It really does. And even from a business standpoint, it matters to the universities. But even beyond that, I think universities, much like practice, we're facing that reckoning that is not going to go away unless we change it. So I think the perfect time to use your voice. You'll be heard.
So to students who really want to kind of let their inner activism shine, I read Angela Davis's book, Freedom is a Constant Struggle. And the first two chapters of the book really talks about the role of student activism and how much it really plays into transformation. And so I think if someone is sitting somewhere thinking that their voice doesn't matter and not very sure about where to go and how to go, it's almost a playbook of activism and coming alongside other transformations in order to advance a cause. And so it's a really great place to kind of start. But honestly, it's about letting your voice be heard, understanding that some of your strongest allies really, particularly in a university setting, are faculty. I sit on the board of a university. Gabrielle and I have conversations, offline about how the university works and structures, along with another friend of ours who's a professor. And sometimes the greatest impact is at the faculty level. And once you understand how the politics of university works and where the weakest link is, you can be incredibly impactful.
And so we talked about individual students. What about companies like our host, our sponsor, OFS? What is it that, what can large organizations do to be more impactful?
Well, be deliberate like OFS. They're deliberate, they're intentional about the focus of this discussion. I think that all firms and practices should do it at some level, because it's not only for the external world, but for your own internal culture. And I can't imagine that there's many firms out there who are not grappling with this issue with their staff So give voice, have those difficult conversations as a start, and be transparent about it. Be transparent about, we recognize where we've been, how we got here. We recognize the ills and the, what needs to change, and then come up with a plan to change it or to advance it. But not having those conversations and not being transparent are, I think those are the nail in the coffin. The other thing I would say, that firms that do have staff of color, do not burden them with educating you on the issues around racism and equity and all that stuff. Educate yourself and check in on your employees of color, your students of color. How you doing?
So I would take that one step further. I think.
Well, I had to leave you something to say.
I always just try and take part of what Gabrielle says and then just try and expand it a little further for people who are trying to figure out, okay, what do I actually need to do? What I really want you to do is create safe spaces for people to have conversation. And I specifically want you to validate and empathize with the experiences of other people within their organization, even though you may yourself not have directly experienced race or racism. To validate and acknowledge somebody else's lived experience is incredibly important. Not to be dismissive of people and their experiences, and to judge them is also critically important. And be willing and open. Specifically, because I wanted to be real specific about what people can do in corporations, because we get this question a lot.
Right.
So I'm trying to be more specific for corporations who are like, well, I have conversations. Yes, but they're not safe spaces for discourse. People still don't feel like they're heard. They still feel judged. They still don't feel validated. They still don't feel that you're being empathetic towards what their lived experiences are. So those would be the things that I would want.
There's a question that has popped up, and I'd be interested to hear from the two of you on this from a student. How do I make my university care about my voice and make it heard when their main priority is in regards to athletics?
I would get a group together, right? Are there others, whether they're in architecture or design or not, but is there a student group that represents you and your culture? Like I said, I've gotten calls from several universities. What do? Our students are demanding these changes. And I think ultimately, if your university is not interested, because this is not just a design issue, right? No. And athletics, the pro athletic teams, right? They're dealing with it. They've put that industry on notice. So it's just a matter of time if it hasn't trickled down. So I'd say, why don't you team up with the athletes of color or dealing with this and bring them all together?
Yeah, bring them on as allies. Yeah.
The other thing I will say, because at some point, not all institutions are going to align. I want to be real clear about that. While there are many institutions who are getting on board and there are some who are going to go kicking and screaming and some who will not go at all. At some point along this journey, along this continuum, there is a reckoning of your own value set to where you are. And that's in an employee-employer way, as well as in a student and an institutional way. So I would also challenge that if you cannot or have trouble in trying to find those allies or resources along the way, question what is the alignment between your value set and the institution that you're in, and make sure that that's the right place for you.
Karen and Gabrielle, let me ask you a question about this phenomena that we've seen of covering. and where we take an aspect of ourselves and hide it. And so it was, quite a bit in the 80s and the 90s, women were told to, if you had a higher pitched voice, you needed to lower the timbre of your voice because you would be more respected if you didn't have a high pitched voice. That's one thing. Covering has extended to people of color being afraid to wear natural hair to work. So they change some aspect about themselves, maybe culturally, maybe physically, to fit in at work. And there's a ridiculously high number of us, 70% of us, don't bring our true and authentic selves to work. And covering has all kinds of aspects, like we're bending ourselves out of shape. And so physically bending ourselves out of shape, that has emotional impact. It also contributes to stress. It contributes to heart conditions. It contributes to diabetes. It contributes to obesity, right? It contributes to so many things. And it comes back to typically a cultural aspect. And I've had a number of students ask me in some way, shape, or form, they're covering their identities to succeed in the design profession. And you would think that design is one of the most authentic professions that celebrates the self. What advice would you give to professionals and students who are covering some cultural aspect of them, of themselves? And that could extend to, I think we have all had this conversation about not wanting to show anger in the workplace because we would be accused of being angry Black women.
That's exactly right. I've had to change the way modify how I communicate if I'm going to be heard. Because if I even not yell, but raise my voice like this, why are you yelling? You're an angry Black woman. Okay, all right, so you're not going to hear me. The other thing is I never bring I never bring my personal life to work because I never know what people are going to do with it, right? So, and I don't know that I'll ever get past that. I think that, again, we're at a point in our profession and society where sooner or later, sooner rather than later, that changing your hair, not wearing your native outfits, clothes, whatever. I hope that folks feel more comfortable doing that, and that doesn't continue as part of the cover, because the whole part of, the design profession should really reflect all of these wonderful differences. And and I think that now is the time. Everybody, all eyes are on us, right? And it's our time to shine. I've always loved being who I am, but I love being Black right now because it's an open conversation. It's a difficult conversation, but I've been living this all my life. So yeah. I think I'm only going to cover a little bit, but I will always protect my personal life because nobody can touch that. Everything else, if I have to change the way I speak for you to really hear me, then I'll do that to a certain point in terms of modification of tone.
So there's this,
that answer the question?
There's this great documentary series that CNN started airing several weeks ago called First Ladies, and the first episode was Michelle Obama. And there's a great scene, 8 minutes in, if you all want to check it out, in which David Axelrod says he called Michelle Obama in, sat her down in front of a teleprompter, and had her watch herself on TV and turn the volume all the way down.
Wow. And
she watched herself on television, and she watched how the world saw her as an angry Black woman, whereas she herself internalized that she was just passionate about having her husband elected. Not to turn this into a political conversation, I just wanted to give that as context, because I think what Gabrielle is expressing and what I have had to do is to meter myself so that people hear what it is I have to say without being interpreted as something else. And I was indoctrinated into this profession by somebody handing me, I'll never forget this, I think it was called The Guide to Work or something like that. It was like What to Wear to Work. That's what it was. And it was a book. It was 110 pages. And I read it cover to cover, and I never varied. I wore that stupid suit and those pantyhose and all the shoulder pad, all of that ridiculousness, so that I could try and belong, so that I could try and fit. And I was never, ever going to fit. That's the part that I never really quite got, that book was not going to help me at all. It put clothes on the outside, but what I really needed to understand was how did my cadence and my delivery, what did the package look like?
Right.
And so some people call it code switching, some people call it covering. I've called it survival. Up to this point in time, I have learned how to read a room really well. But I'm 55 years old. I've learned how to read a room, read people, and alter the cadence and the delivery that I have for a particular situation. It's exhausting to most, but like we've talked about on other calls, Cheryl, we've been doing it so long.
Right.
The day that I don't have to do it, I don't know what I'm going to do.
Yeah. It's
that's the sad part.
It's DNA deep that not only understanding ourselves, but understanding how we are perceived, rightly or wrongly, by others. I think it's an abiding consciousness that we have as Black women, as people of color, that it's just something that lives in the back of our head, that we think about how other people think about us. And it's not just
act
accordingly.
And it's not just that they think about it. Some people actually act on it. I mean, in 2015, I think I told you, I know I told Gabrielle, in 2015, I interviewed to lead the strategic plan for a major engineering firm here in Los Angeles. And the CEO, guess he didn't do his homework. He didn't realize I was African American. So when he walked in the room, he audibly gasped when he met me. This is 2015. This isn't 1815. And I knew at that moment I was never going to work for that firm, but I had a lot of fun with that interview, boy, because I didn't care. But the whole point is that in that moment, there was no need for me to cover anything.
No.
I was going to be who I was going to be. And it was probably the most liberating interview I ever had, but I also knew I wasn't going to get the job. So,
gasp away. Let him gasp away. So you two have a vodcast. Two of you have teamed up and you do a vodcast. Talk to us about that. What do you talk about? You take some deep dives. Tell our students in the audience what you talk about on your podcast and where they can find you.
Well, do you want to go, Gabrielle?
I'll go first, and she's a good closer. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, it was after George Floyd's murder, and we would talk often about how we were feeling and what's going on in the industry and our practices and so forth. And Karen got really, really annoyed that firms were not stepping up. They weren't saying anything. They weren't acknowledging how this all impacts our industry and our firms. And so we talked and we said, okay, they're probably not saying anything because they don't know what to say. And many of them have said that. So we said, okay, why don't we create a forum to be able to have those difficult conversations and to help people, if we can, get past their uncomfortableness. The purpose was to get these conversations going as a start to real change and to break the silence on this issue, particularly of race and racism and how it manifests itself and how it's systematic, throughout. So we invited different guests. It's a 20-minute or so segment, and we've had
10
municipal leaders, we've had firm leaders, we've had professors. So we're trying to cover all the bases: academia, practice, and policy. And on those occasions where we just have questions from our fans, subscribers, they're called subscribers.
Fans, subscribers.
We'll do an episode where we answer those questions, not unlike some of the questions you've asked us today. So Karen, you can elaborate because you do that well.
Yeah. Yeah, see, I'm the closer.
Got it.
So we do end up with a number of different questions. And so we alternate between episodes of a guest. And then in between, we do actually take subscriber questions that are sent to us via YouTube, LinkedIn, or Instagram. I believe somebody actually shared the link.
Yes.
All of the shows are actually on the YouTube channel right now, and we actually are on hiatus, yay, until the beginning of the year. But we're continuing to take questions. We just started posting short, true podcasts, like 3-minute, 4-minute answers to questions that we've been getting in because we actually stopped taping at the end of, I want to say, September or October through the holidays, to just the end of the year, which is a little bit crazy. But it was truly born out of exasperation and the conversation that the question that you led with originally, Cheryl, which is, where do we go from here? Mm-hmm. And Gabrielle and I were like, okay, we just cannot sit on another town hall that's not actionable with people saying, well, I don't know what to do. Okay, then let us tell you what to do. And they have being met with such great response, amazing response. We've gotten questions from the Netherlands, from Spain.
Awesome.
It's really been awesome.
I'm glad to hear it. Well, Ryan has posted the link for everybody, and to hear more from Karen and Gabrielle. Gabrielle, were you going to say something? Did I cut you off?
I was going to say that what's been great, and I think why people don't mind coming on and being in the seat, is that they really are able to ask questions that they have no idea what the answer is, but mm-hmm. they see that we can provide some sort of perspective to them, and we're doing it to help everybody, right? It's not a shame. It's not a shame or blame. I don't have time for that.
Judgment.
No, it's not judgment. It's like, let's have these really honest conversations. And so folks have been very, very open, honest, vulnerable, and have taken resresponsibility in whatever
way they can.
They have in it.
Yeah.
That's great. We've got about 10 minutes before we're turning this over to students to ask you both questions. I've got 2 more questions for you, and knowing that we've got students here and students listening in and who are looking at the job market, looking for jobs. There are jobs out there, firms are hiring. What would you tell the students is important for them to know about skills and competencies that they should have or should acquire or should be cognizant of as we move into this kind of post-pandemic, more racially aware, more equity aware society? What skills and competencies should students absolutely have or start working on now as we're looking at this shift and change in our society?
Okay, I'm going to go first this time.
And that's the thing. Who are you looking for? Tell me who you're looking for.
Who's
the perfect candidate?
Karen.
Yeah. Who's your candidate?
Because I got a strong opinion on this. So university is amazing at teaching skills. It doesn't do as well as I would like for developing competencies. And the Society of Human Resource Managers, or SHRM, has a list of, I believe, 52 competencies. The competencies that I would love to see in students, new hires, listening is one, judgment, active ability to solve problems and engage in conversation. And that's not to say you have to have the best presentation skills. Engagement is such a huge facet of what we do in design and construction. Getting people to actually talk to you is 70% of the ability to solve their problem. And so those are the things that I would look for or look at from a professional standpoint. Gabrielle can contribute on the design side of the coin. I tell her all the time, okay, I don't know the difference between shades of blue. So I'm staying in my box. But nonetheless, I mean, those are the things that stick out for me.
Who are you looking for, Gabrielle?
I am looking for a storyteller.
Yeah.
And you can start by being able to tell your story in this virtual interview mode, and bring what you think is unique about yourself to the table. So in other words, and I keep going back to this, Pandora's box is open.
Mm-hmm.
The more we can share about who we are and what we bring to the table from our lived experiences, because that is the new way that we're looking at talent, is what's their lived experiences. We must put a value on that. We must take interest in that. So those are really important things. I think engagement is really important. And, you know, we're hiring people. We're not just we're not putting butts in seats. That we don't need to do that anymore. So it's really the individual and, you know, all the skill set, you know, Revit and all that stuff. And I'll give you just one really short example. So I had a request from a recent graduate from a school, didn't know him from Adam, but found me on LinkedIn. So I spent an hour with him. He shared with me his portfolio, and it was wonderful, beautiful drawings. And he did this project in Oakland, California. And he was a person of mixed race. So I'm looking at the renderings. I said, could you zoom in on that rendering right there? I said, what do you see? I said, this is a public library. Who are the people that you're showing on that plaza? He said, I know where you're going. I said, that's right. It's a Black community. It's a community of color. It should not all be white people going to that facility. He said, good point. My partner, you know, the other student, they did the renderings. I said, but that's not. So anyway, be knowledgeable about what's going on that's impacting our profession as much as you can.
As much as you can, and bring yourself.
And bring yourself.
My last question for you two, before we turn it over to the students, what are you hopeful and optimistic about?
I am hopeful that we're turning the corner. I really am. I mean, it's really draining talking about this, you know, for the last 6 months, but I am hopeful. Okay. I really think that the profession, the design profession, both architecture and interior design, will get better with the focus on equity, inclusion, and diversity.
Excellent. Karen, what are you hopeful and optimistic about?
So I'm optimistic that we are having the conversations and can advance discussion. I'm more conservative about whether or not I've rounded that corner or if I can just see it. Okay. And by that, I mean, I really need to see more firms, not just on the architecture side of the equation, but across the built environment as a whole, engineering, construction, all of the disciplines, really truly step up and embrace justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion on a holistic basis. Then I'll be able to say, I think I'm turning a corner. Right now, I can see the corner, like it's over there. I can see it.
You know, when you just said that, I was like, I didn't sound like Trump, did I? It's almost gone. I didn't mean it.
That's so all right. Gabrielle, the corner is there. One of you might be closer to the corner than the other, but you're at least optimistic.
I am hopeful.
Usually she's the one driving. We're Thelma and Louise. So I'm Louise, she's Thelma, she drives. It's a mess. It's just a mess.
But that movie had a bad ending, and we don't want that for the two of you. Let's jump to we've got some students with some questions, and I think Kyle is our first. Are you ready? There you are.
Yes. Thank you, Cheryl. Hi, everyone. I'm Payal, and I'm an interior design student in my sophomore year at the West Valley College in Northern California. My question is, in the light of the recent unfortunate events that occurred around racial discrimination in the US, what are some of the grassroots level changes being made in the early education system, such as curriculum changes or any addition of books that are being made for the preschool through elementary education? If you could please shed some light on that. Thank you.
So it's funny you should bring this up because my daughter's actually doing research on this right now. And she's beginning to look, they're beginning to actually look at, especially for preschool children, ages 5, 6 in that range, their earliest memories around culture and cultural identification actually come around holidays. And so they're really trying to create a correlation between how we do everything for grade school children, not just around books and alphabets and numbers and things like that, but how do we talk about culture in a much more holistic way, so that Black History Month isn't just a month in the shortest calendar month in the year, but it's actually integrated throughout the discussion of an early childhood development education, much like the contributions of Mexican Americans or anything else or anyone else within society. So those conversations are just now beginning to happen. And I'm hopeful that they will continue as early childhood educators begin to realize the need to not create a homogeneous educational system, but to really create a diverse and inclusive system that brings in different cultural experiences and history into the instruction of younger children and how that moves forward into high school and college.
And I can't speak to the early education except to say that I saw on the news the other day here in Los Angeles that they were pulling certain books. Tom Sawyer, I can't remember the other ones, but so I think they're looking at it. I would say that at the higher education level, it is a conversation. And I think particularly when it comes to design, schools, it's about the pedagogy, it's about the curriculum. Who are we teaching about? You know, what kinds of architecture? And so I know that RISD, for example, is looking at revamping their entire program to be more responsive to the inclusion and diversity issue and equity. So, and again, that came from, it comes from the students and outside pressure.
Yeah.
So I think it's just a matter of time.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Payal.
Thank you, Paul. Great question.
Thank you.
And I think we've got Amy up next.
Yes.
Hi, Amy.
Hello. Hi, everyone. My
Hi,
name is
Amy.
Amy New. I'm an interior design student at the University of North Texas in my senior year. My question is kind of relating to gentrification and that issue. So over time, growing up, I didn't even know what gentrification was, but I've become increasingly aware of it over time. And I've noticed the design industry's relationship with it and how they're so interrelated. And how can we as designers who, we're directly profiting from new construction, development, renovation, how can we effectively respect and support underprivileged communities who are negatively affected by this issue while maintaining our livelihood?
So Amy, I think that we're grappling with this issue on some projects that we're doing in South Los Angeles. And I would say that we as designers and architects can no longer just stand on the sidelines and not understanding what the developers' motivation and aspirations are. And we have to challenge them. We have to challenge the status quo, because take developers, for instance, if you're a known gentrifier in a community, then we ought to know that. And then we should choose not to work with you. right? Now, yes, that sounds easy to do. You know, turning away a client is not something we do often, but I think it's a matter of understanding what gentrification is, educating ourselves, and know what to look for, understand the zoning, and then get involved in changing that policy or that practice of whoever you're working with. And if you're working in a community and you're doing good, you're doing the right thing, and then the next project comes on right down the street, if that's the known gentrifier, not only is it going to mess up what you're doing to that community with the new project, it will discount everything you've done in the previous project, right? So it's not something we can say, okay, I don't care about it today and then care about it tomorrow. We have to change the status quo and what are we aligning ourselves with, our values with, right? And once you see something, you can't unsee it, as we've all learned.
I would say there's an opportunity, even as a student, to become involved in your own city's urban planning and policy making. You can see the greatest impacts at those levels. And that, to me, is where you begin to really, truly understand the issues of gentrification and redlining and the impacts of it. And then how do we as professionals design around that? Understand that the door of policy is open to everyone in society. And it's where the greatest impact can happen. Architects and developers respond to what is written as a form of policy. If you really want to see change, start there. That's your entry point.
Right. And I'm sorry.
No, and all I was going to say was, and just know that your age does not define your engagement. If you can vote, you can certainly be a part of an urban planning effort or involved within your city or your municipality in ways that would be incredibly impactful for underprivileged or emerging communities.
Right. And, you know, gentrification really, if you think about it in these terms, it could be cultural erasure. So as we design, if we think about warding off cultural erasure, what does that mean? It means engaging the community as a design partner, listening to where they've been and where they're going, right? Don't tell them what they need, because the more ownership and pride a community has in their community, what's built in their community, the more the higher chance they'll stay and they won't sell to the highest bidder.
And Gabrielle, in your experience, you've seen in neighborhoods, residents are becoming much more activist about saving certain aspects of a community, like the first Black barbershop, or there are aspects of community that the residents are really becoming much more activist about, and understanding that, just as you were talking about.
And that's part of what that's part of that cultural fabric that we don't want to erase. Sure, we can put in a brand new barbershop, but that's not the same. We're doing a project in LA where the oldest Black-owned gym, and we are going to preserve it, and not only preserve it, but make it even better. Because yeah, we can get a new fancy one, but that's not a tribute to the community.
Yeah, perfect. Amy, thank you for that great question.
Thank you, guys.
I think we've got Kay up next. Hi, Kay.
Hi, Cheryl. Hi, everyone. My name is Kay Myers. I am a second-year student in a 2-year associate's degree program at Madison College here in Madison, Wisconsin. And Cheryl, you touched on the health effects, the stress that comes from covering, and clearly the pandemic has shed great light, I think, on the health inequity in this country. And so my question is, health equity and green equity are inextricably linked. How do we best advocate for both while designing public spaces?
I think if we can define good design, sustainable design by including all what you just said. You can't have a sustainable project if it's not healthy. You can't have a sustainable project that's not resilient Is it going to withstand? Is it going to maintain the resiliency of the community? So I think if we look at those three things, and you can't have one without the other, right? Healthy, you know, and you can apply that to every decision you have to make on a project, right? Where's the train stop? How far away from, you know, how do people get there? Is it convenient, especially during COVID and the pandemic? Marginalized folks have to go to work and they have to take public transportation. So how can we design our cities and our spaces to acknowledge that and accommodate that in the design so that we're not perpetuating the harm? So we can be as green as we want, but if we're not healthy, if we're not influencing on the good side of healthy and viable, then we're really not being sustainable or resilient. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
I still contend that part of it is a policy issue too, though, because environmental justice or health equity, green equity, social equity, all are deeply rooted in redlining. And some of those, although that is now illegal, the behaviors and the systems and the institutions are in place. And if we really want to advocate for both health equity and green equity, we really need to get down to what is the public policy in a particular area that supports or discourages environmental justice, health justice, and societal change. So, I mean, that's my very 30,000 foot view of it.
That's the policy version.
But that's the policy version of it.
But that's an important side. They're inextricably linked. So
yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kay.
Thank you.
And how about Antara? Can we get Antara queued up here? There she is. All right. Hi,
everyone.
Welcome.
I'm
Antara. Hi, I'm Antara. I am an interior design student in my final year of grad school at SCAD Atlanta. My question for the panelist is, what are some strategies for a female who is a person of color as well as an immigrant to keep her optimism high entering this design industry where like pressing issues of racism, hatred for immigrants, and gender minority exists?
Do you love what you do? Do you love the profession?
Yeah.
You have conviction. You have conviction about that.
Mm-hmm.
Do what you can to help fix the other stuff, but don't let it be you. You know, challenge it when you can, but you know, don't let it knock you down. This is not. It's pretty dismal right now. It feels kind of yucky. But I think you have to have hope and be willing to help chart the course. But don't let it, you know.
Understand that as an industry, the issues of race and racism and immigration are not unique to the design profession as a whole. Everyone is experiencing that level of intensity right now, regardless. So while it is very true that there are not as many people of color within the design profession, what I would encourage is the development of allyship, other colleagues who may not necessarily be within the design profession themselves, but who share the angst and the feelings associated with the challenges of race and racism and immigration, and use them as part of a support system, because you'll need that just as much as you'll need colleagues within the profession itself in order to make the transition between university student and professional. And so that would be my place for you to start.
Stay strong, Antara.
Thank you so much.
And know that it's not our responsibility as people of color. The burden of fixing this does not fall on our shoulders.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank
Yeah.
you. I think we've got Kira back.
I saw her.
Kira? Yeah, it's here.
Yes,
There
hi,
she
so
is.
sorry about
It's
that.
okay.
Well, hi, my name is Kira Rui Collins, and I'm a senior interior design student at Texas State University. And my question is, because the interior design.
Kira, we might need you to type your question into the chat because we still want to get her question.
Here, I can maybe ask it for
Yeah.
her real quick.
Can you
while
help
she's-
out, Ryan? Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Kira, I'll try and chime in real quick for you. Kira's question is, because the interior design industry is predominantly made up of white women, and it is assumed that interior design is only for consumers of higher socioeconomic status, how can the industry change this classist first impression while also encouraging more diversity to explore and enter the practice of interior design?
I'm going to use Cheryl's term. I think it was you. Maybe I said, I don't know. We change what we design by changing who designs it. So I think that, again, we have to think about who are we designing for, and do we know how to design for different people? I think that if we, just continue to think that, only the most elite can afford interior design, right, then it's going to stay that way. So we have to change the perception of our profession. We can start by educating the public on what we do and why we do it, and do pro bono services within communities that don't know what interior designers do, and show them how we can make spaces better and for them, right?
Mhm.
But we have to get in it.
Yep.
I think interior design for such a long time has been seen as classist because there hasn't been a wonderful articulation of how the creation of interior space brings along and supports wellness and living. And I think we need to do a better job collectively of telling that story, that while architecture may frame the building, the experience that you have within a space is really truly created in large part by the interiors.
Mhm.
And we have to do a better job of really articulating that impact so that there isn't just this impression that it's just for the elite, because it's not. It really truly is about creating spaces that function better, that provide better health, that provide just better being.
Reinforcing that design is a necessity and not a luxury.
Yeah.
And you're right, Karen, articulating that the entirety of the human experience happens in the spaces that designers are
It
creating.
happens in this space.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for that. And I think our last question is from Denise.
Hi, my name is Denise Lee. I am a junior this year and I attend Western Michigan University. And my question is just like, what do you see in the future for designers from like this point and on?
I see Karen's going to come up with policy or something. So I'm just.
I'm not.
I see opportunity to influence and transform the profession, influence society, and through design, what can we do in our reckoning of the societal crises we're having right now? I think it's a great opportunity to be on the forefront of using this horrible experience to turn it into something really good. And I think people of color it's a fantastic opportunity to do that.
If there has ever been a time to be a person of color, now is that time. It really truly is an apex. I think truly what I have learned in all of this and what I see is that you have to dream the future that has yet to be charted. if anybody had told me 15 or 20 years ago there would be something called an Instagram, I would go, huh? Why? You know, I think part of the future of design has yet still to be defined. And the opportunity belongs to you and your generation to chart what that course looks like and how it can be different. It does not have to be a mirror of what has preceded it, just because that's what you see. And so I think, much like Gabrielle, the future is incredibly bright, but it's bright for people of color, for women, and for those who want to challenge what the future can become and what it looks like from a design perspective, really.
Perfect. I love that. It's bright and it's broad.
Very, very
Love
much
that.
so.
Love that.
And so I stayed out the policy lane. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that question, Denise. I want to grab one question. You all were so good. We're a little bit ahead of time. So I want to grab a really important question that after we've had this great conversation, what do we do now? What do we do after this? What, you know, after we jump off Zoom and maybe have a cocktail? What's next? What's next for our assembled students? What's next for our audience? What do we do next?
Honestly, activism. If you've never had an activist bone in your entire body, now is that time. If you're really asking me, what is it now? I would say that from the bottom of my heart. Get involved, get engaged in not just in conversations, but in really changing the narrative of how and what happens going forward. In a matter of 60 some odd days, we're going to have a new presidential administration, and we're going to see a lot of shift. The next 10 months, 11 months are going to continue to be very dynamic for a variety of different reasons. And I expect every indication from for that to be so. So at this moment, at this time, because it is such a unique moment in time and in history, get involved, get engaged. Do not let life happen to you. You need to happen to life.
Nice, nice. Gabrielle?
And as you're sipping a cocktail, if you just wanted to think of one thing that you could do tomorrow or next week to either learn about, explore, create, that answers a question that you have about this topic. What, in your experience, and we've all had experience, school or whatever, what would you change about the curriculum that you're learning at school? And how might you present that to your school?
That's
as an
excellent.
example.
Yep, that's excellent. Words of wisdom, words of insight, words of advice. Gabrielle and Karen, I can't thank you enough on behalf of IIDA and Team IIDA, and a huge shout out to the students and our attendees and
Thank
to
you.
our sponsor, to our sponsor, OFS. Thank you for supporting this conversation. Doug Shapiro with OFS, thank you for being such a strong champion for IIDA and for all things students and for all things equity and diversity. There's a CEU reminder for those of you who want CEU credit. And for everyone out there, be bold, be brave, be well, take care, and thank you for joining us for this incredibly important conversation. Keep doing what you do.